In the world of country and pop music, Jim Reeves was riding a wave of growing fame. Starting from humble beginnings, he worked hard and became known as Gentleman Jim, captivating audiences with his incredible voice and unforgettable songs. But amidst his rise to fame, tragedy struck and the music world would lose one of its greatest. Join us as we explore the incredible journey of Jim Reeves, from his meteoric rise to his untimely demise. Jim Reeves was born as James Travis Reeves on August 20th, 1924, in Galloway, Texas. He grew up as the youngest of 9 children in a poor farming family, and sadly, Jim's father died when Jim was just a baby, forcing his older brothers to leave school and help support the family. Then one day, Jim was in Louisiana with his brother delivering some cotton when he saw a couple of men playing music, and one of them had a guitar. Seeing that guitar, Jim knew he had to have one, and immediately after getting home, he began crafting his own guitar out of a cigar box and some rubber bands. Later, he exchanged a basket of fruit for his first real guitar, a second-hand one that was in rough shape, missing some of its strings. Luckily, a construction worker fixed it up for him and taught him a few basic chords. This experience ignited Jim's love for music, leading to his first radio show at the age of 9, where he had a 15-minute slot on a Shreveport station. But music wasn't Jim's only passion. He was just as passionate about sports, eventually becoming a star player on the school's baseball team. Winning an athletic scholarship to the University of Texas, he enrolled at the school to study speech and drama. However, after just 6 weeks, he left college to work at the shipyards in Houston because he needed the money. He did, however, return to baseball, playing in semi-professional leagues before signing with the St. Louis Cardinals in 1944. Unfortunately, an ankle injury from a fall prematurely ended his sports career. With more time on his hands, Jim fully immersed himself in music and radio. He began his new career as a radio announcer, often singing live in between broadcasting songs, and next to that, he also played gigs at local clubs and honky-tonks. His musical style was influenced by early country and western swing legends like Jimmie Rodgers and Moon Mullican, as well as more popular singers such as Bing Crosby, Eddie Arnold, and Frank Sinatra. This diverse range of influences helped shape his unique sound. Then, in 1947, Jim married Mary White, a school teacher who strongly supported his musical pursuits. Her encouragement led him to start singing as an amateur and to front for Moon Mullican's band. But that was not it. As a solo artist, he recorded some Mullican-style songs, but none achieved significant success. This led him to shift his focus to broadcasting, where he started as a DJ and newsreader and later became the host of the popular Louisiana Hayride in 1952. Then one night, country music singer Hank Williams didn't show up for his performance, and Jim was asked to fill in. In the audience that night was Faber Robinson, the owner of Abbott Records, who was impressed and offered Jim a recording contract on the spot. And this record deal quickly led to success. His second release, Mexican Joe, soared to #1 on the country charts in 1953, and that same year he released another massive hit, Bimbo, which caught RCA's attention and eventually led to Jim signing with them in 1955. But even more impressive was Jim joining the Grand Ole Opry, a renowned weekly country music concert in Nashville, Tennessee, and up until 1969, Jim's name was rarely absent from the charts. Initially, Jim's music was rooted in traditional country, but everything changed with the 1957 release of Four Walls, a smooth ballad that marked a big shift in his musical direction. Unbeknownst to Jim, who was touring Europe at the time, the song climbed both the pop and country charts, signaling his transition towards the soft and intimate pop-oriented style of country that made him a superstar and earned him the nickname Gentleman Jim. And a gentleman he was. In an interview about his rising popularity, he once shared, "Maybe it's just that I sound as if I enjoy what I'm doing. I don't work too hard at it. I never press. I just go on doing what I enjoy doing. And if other people like it, I'm glad. After all, this is the only life we get. We just come through here once, and I believe in making it a satisfying experience." Around the same time, Jim Reeves started to reshape his public image as well, trading his cowboy outfits for sport coats, slacks, and occasionally even tuxedos. This change in style helped bring country music to a broader urban audience and catapulted him to international stardom, with tours across Europe in 1957, South Africa in 1962, and later visits to England and Ireland. In 1963, he even starred in the South African movie Kimberly Jim, But sadly, Jim wouldn't live to see its release. Although fans couldn't understand the lyrics, one journalist wrote, "The resonant purr from the honeyed larynx of Jim Reeves has an almost hypnotic effect." And for many years, he was the only country artist with significant record sales overseas, especially in Europe. But as Jim Reeves' international fame grew, so did the demands on his time, leading him to try to maintain a busy and hectic schedule, and his tour bus, Big Blue, was no longer sufficient to keep up with his commitments. This pressure led him to purchase his own aircraft, a single-engine Beechcraft Debonair, registered as N8972M, despite once having a strong premonition about dying in a plane crash. And with that in mind, it's even more intriguing that Jim had obtained his private pilot's license just a month earlier, under somewhat questionable circumstances. It is believed that Jim paid a flight instructor to pass him on his flying test, despite not having practiced his flying skills sufficiently. At the time, Jim wasn't truly prepared to fly, but feeling pressured after an exhausting tour, he felt compelled to buy and pilot a plane himself. Adding a layer of eeriness, the flight instructor who conducted Jim's test was the same one who had trained Randy Hughes, the pilot of Patsy Cline's airplane, which tragically crashed a year earlier on March 5, 1963. On July 30th, 1964, Jim Reeves, along with his business partner and manager, Dean Manuel, who was also the pianist of Jim's group, the Blue Boys, flew to Batesville, Arkansas. There they were interested in viewing a property Jim was considering buying to possibly develop a resort. Originally, they had planned to depart the day before, but Jim decided to delay the flight until the next day due to weather reports he had received. Jim and Dean spent hours in Batesville exploring various properties and continued their search into the next day. However, by the afternoon of July 31st, storm clouds were forming, prompting Jim to check with the weather station for an update. As a pilot who relied on visual flight rules only, which require clear skies, Jim needed favorable weather conditions. Upon learning that storm clouds were already forming along his intended route, he decided to get ahead of the storm. The two hastily said their goodbyes and rushed to the airport. At the small airfield, Jim made another call to Walnut Ridge for a weather update on their route toward Nashville, where the conditions were reported with clouds at 3,500 feet. Under visual flight rules, a pilot must maintain visual contact with the ground at all times. So, a VFR pilot facing clouds during daylight has basically two options. Either find a safe altitude to fly below the clouds, or decide whether the clouds along the route simply mean that visual flight is not possible and the only option is to delay the flight and wait for better conditions. However, we already know that Jim did not choose the latter option. So, at around 3 p.m., Jim and Dean boarded the Beechcraft airplane for the 280-mile trip from Batesville to Nashville. Jim quickly performed his pre-flight checks, started the engine, taxied to the runway, and then took off, planning to reach Nashville in about 2 hours. About half an hour into the flight, Jim received weather updates from the flight services at Dyersburg Airport, and it appears he was attempting to navigate around the reported cloud cover at that time. At about 4:40 p.m., Jim contacted Nashville's approach at Berry Field, reporting that he was approximately 30 miles west of Nashville and flying at an altitude of 5,500 feet. At this point, there were scattered clouds at 4,000 feet, yet the conditions remained suitable for VFR flying. 6 minutes later, Jim received clearance from Nashville's control to begin descending at his discretion. But as he descended about 16 miles from the airfield, Jim was alerted about impending rain along his route. The controller at Berryfield advised that Jim make a right turn to head south of the airport to avoid the rain. However, Jim reported seeing the precipitation to the left of his intended path, and he believed he didn't need to make the turn. From that moment, it is speculated that Jim could see glimpses of the ground directly below him and was navigating by following the roads he was familiar with. Contrary to the controller's initial advice to make a right turn to avoid the storm, Jim turned left, aiming to follow Franklin Road to the airport. Unfortunately, this maneuver led him further into the rain, a decision that ultimately proved fatal. With less than 3 miles to go to the airport, Jim flew directly into a forming thunderstorm, which can seriously reduce visibility. At 4:51 p.m., Jim radioed the tower, and reported he was caught in heavy rain and couldn't see anything. He sounded very anxious and mentioned that he was unable to escape the downpour. The controller, however, thought that if Jim continued on his current path, he would soon be out of the rain, possibly within just a mile. When the controller at Berryfield contacted him again a few minutes later to ask if he had exited the rain, Jim responded with negative, although the transmission was cut off before he could finish speaking. This would be the last communication between Berryfield's tower and Jim's Beechcraft airplane. Just 5 minutes later, the airplane vanished from the radar. While preoccupied with re-establishing his ground references and keeping an eye on Franklin Road, Jim let his airspeed drop too low, leading to a stall, a critical mistake. The plane's engine began to sputter, and tragically, during these crucial moments, Jim relied more on his instincts than his training. Instead of remembering his training on how to handle a stall, Jim applied full power and pulled back on the yoke before leveling his wings. A fatal error that caused the plane to spin, from which he was too low to recover. Just 5 miles from their destination airport, the plane quickly fell below the tree line, followed by the harrowing sounds of metal crashing into trees. Immediately after the crash, a massive search effort began for the missing plane, including the Davidson County Civil Defense, local and state police, and numerous volunteers. The Nashville FAA reported that planes were surveying the crash site within just 5 minutes of losing radar contact with the Beechcraft. The plane had gone down in an area known for being the home of several country music legends, including Eddie Arnold, Chet Atkins, Ernest Tubb, Stonewall Jackson, and Marty Robbins, all of whom joined the search efforts. But even though more than 700 volunteers, civil defense workers, and police officers focused on a 20-square-mile area based on multiple witness testimonies, it would take them 44 hours to find the first remains of the crash. Then, on the morning of Sunday, August 2nd, almost 2 days after the search began, civil defense investigator Bob Newton acted on a tip from Perry Mims, who reported seeing the plane fly over his swimming pool toward Radnor Lake. Using this information, Bob mapped a direct line from Perry's house to the lake and started following the path on foot. And it wasn't long before he discovered the wreckage, with its engine and nose buried deep in the ground from the impact. Tennessee Highway Patrolman John Kane remarked that the plane was completely demolished and showed signs of fire. It is believed that Eddie Arnold, a country music star and mutual friend of Jim and Dean, identified the bodies at the site. However, it's worth mentioning that the severe impact left little for an autopsy, leading to the belief that Jim and Dean died instantly on impact. By 1 p.m. local time, radio stations across the United States began to formally announce Jim Reeves' death. Jim died at the age of 40. A subsequent investigation revealed that once the small airplane became caught in the storm, Jim suffered from spatial disorientation. There were rumors, possibly started unintentionally by his wife Mary, that he had been flying upside down, mistakenly thinking he was increasing altitude to escape the storm. However, Larry Jordan, who wrote the 2011 biography Jim Reeves, His Untold Story, refutes this theory. Larry cites that eyewitnesses who observed the plane just before the accident confirmed that it was not upside down at the time. The investigation found no mechanical faults with the aircraft, and the National Transportation Safety Board concluded its investigation into the aviation accident, attributing the cause to pilot error. Specifically, the NTSB identified Jim's decision to continue flying under VFR into IFR weather conditions as the primary error, which they said led to a loss of control. Following Jim Reeves' death, his fan base grew exponentially, and his posthumous releases not only kept his legacy alive, but even outperformed his earlier singles. In the 3 years after his passing, he achieved 6 #1 singles. And he also left behind an extensive collection of over 100 unreleased songs, which continue to generate significant revenue, bringing in at least $400,000 per year even to this day. Jim Reeves was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame in 1967, further solidifying his legacy and place in music history. It's sad to think about the further success he might have had if not for that tragic night in July 1964.